Hi again. Jonathan Butler's last chapter in The Rise of Adventism is entitled Adventism and the American Experience, and Butler is dealing with the early Seventh-day Adventist response to the Civil War, and particularly its view of America and its role in history. Butler says, after the stillness of Appomattox, prominent Northern evangelicals voiced the vindication of the Yankee cause. The American postmillennialism that stumbled in the 1850s and 1860s regained its footing in such men as Henry Ward Beecher, Lyman Abbott, and Josiah Strong. The world-transforming mission of American evangelicals, absorbed by anti-slavery and the Civil War, resurged in a vast home and foreign missionary enterprise, a vigorous temperance movement, Sabbatarian reform, and numerous other crusades. Strong invoked the usual American eschatology. Quote, "My plea is not save America for America's sake, but save America for the world's sake." End of quote. At the same time, the premillennialism of Dwight L. Moody dominated the revival meetings and prophetic conferences of conservative evangelicalism. Their premillennialism notwithstanding, Moody and the other professional revivalists offered tacit support for the American system to become an outspoken faith of 20th century revivalism, and radiated optimism for evangelism and institutional expansion under the umbrella of Americanism, and generally upheld the social order. Where the post-war premillennialists expressed pessimism for the world, they never sank as deeply into the slough of despond as did antebellum Adventists. There were dissenters from the evangelical conception of the American mission. Adventist, holiness, and Pentecostal groups, as William McLaughlin writes, pulled away from the evangelical consensus at the bottom, just as the radical social gospelers or Christian socialists pulled away at the top. Both groups found evangelicals too culture-bound, too willing to compromise with the prevailing order, too much concerned with respectability, conformity, and the status quo. The Seventh-day Adventists felt pressures of influence from both evangelicalism and sectarian Adventism in relating to the Republic from the mid-1870s and onward. Like sectarians, they retained their view of America as the two-horned beast of Revelation 13. But like the evangelicals, they permitted the contours of the beast to soften in the third phase of Adventist development. Pictorial illustrations in Adventist journals and books denote the iconographic metamorphosis. In the 1850s, a Uriah Smith woodcut of the animal unveiled America as a hideous boar-like beast with a long row of venomous teeth. In the 1870s and 1880s, the beast gradually lost teeth, pictorially, until by 1905 it had become an affable American buffalo. S.N. Haskell, a prominent Adventist at the turn of the century, referred to the American beast as lamb-like, where for earlier interpreters it had possessed only lamb-like horns. Within another generation, the one-time harsh woodcut gargoyle had mollified into the gamboling little lamb of 1940s Adventist evangelistic charts. Of primary importance in this development was Seventh-day Adventist interest with most evangelicals in world missionary expansion. The Adventist shut door of salvation had cracked open in the 1850s when Adventists learned empirically that they could make converts among those who had not passed through the Millerite experience. In the mid-1870s, the door swung wide open in both home and foreign missionary endeavor. From 1870 to 1880, Seventh-day Adventists experienced an annual membership increase of 12%, from 5,440 to 15,570, largely through small-town tent-meeting evangelism. They also penetrated France, Italy, Denmark, Norway, and England in this decade. The important 1888 General Conference in Minneapolis occurred at the crest of this evangelistic period, when young voices, together with an aging prophetic voice, called for an evangelical emphasis on righteousness by faith that repented of an earlier sectarian legalism. By 1901, the Seventh-day Adventists numbered approximately 75,000 members and supported 16 colleges and high schools, a medical school, 27 hospitals and sanitariums, 13 publishing houses, and 31 other miscellaneous institutions. Such development prompted Edwin Gaustad's apt characterization that while Seventh-day Adventists were expecting a kingdom of God from the heavens, they worked diligently for one on earth. The sense of a wider gospel commission brought Seventh-day Adventists into a new rapprochement with civil authorities. Ellen White counseled, "The less we make direct charges against authorities and powers, the greater work we shall be able to accomplish, both in America and in foreign countries." As the movement spread from its northern matrix into the south, Adventists met with violent opposition in the late 1890s for their work among blacks. Mrs. White, once the lioness on racial issues, encouraged discretion to the point of racial separatism so that the gospel would not be impeded among white Southerners. In the international sphere, the denomination entered countries less tolerant of the free speech that had marked Adventism throughout the Civil War, and political opinions were necessarily muted. A.T. Jones, editor of the American Sentinel, a forerunner of liberty, echoed the political apocalypticism of the earlier Adventism and provoked an Ellen White testimony on moderation. In 1893, free land in South Africa had been offered to the denomination by Cecil Rhodes. Jones, in the ensuing church-state controversy, vehemently opposed acceptance of the land. But Mrs. White wrote from an Australian residence, quote, "The Lord still moves upon the hearts of kings and rulers in behalf of his people, and it becomes those who are so deeply interested in the religious liberty question not to cut off any favors or withdraw themselves from the help that God has moved men to give for the advancement of his cause." End of quote. Further efforts to subdue Jones likewise came from overseas. S.N. Haskell, then a missionary in South Africa, wrote to the General Conference President, O.A. Olson, "Should we deal in such language as is sometimes in the Sentinel and as it is used in some of the speeches in America, our work would be brought into the greatest straits in a very short time. I sometimes wish some of our American brethren could see the effect of some of their unguarded speeches in these foreign fields." Equal to the effect of missionary expansion, changes in American politics influenced the Seventh-day Adventist interrelationship to the Republic. Adventist premillennialism could no longer draw upon a radical Republican reservoir, as Civil War and Reconstruction politics have passed into a grim memory, perhaps to the embarrassment of Adventists who never expected as much, short of the Second Coming. The Republican Party realigned itself around new issues that included its attitudes on rum and Romanism, and Adventists adapted their eschatology accordingly. The prophetess was midwife for the new eschatology. White, still not enamored with the social and political order, nevertheless she envisioned a less imminent end to the Republic. In fact, she urged Adventists to be, in effect, a tiny political cadre, doing their part to prolong the American future so that the Adventist message could go forth and flourish. With a turn of mind faintly suggestive of Josiah Strong's, Mrs. White, in the 1880s, hoped to save America, a short time at least, for the world's sake. She departed dramatically from earlier interpretations of the two-horned beast in Revelation 13, and wrote that the American beast still brandished the lamb-like horns of civil and religious tolerance, and only eventually would become a dragon. Earlier, Uriah Smith and the others had believed that the American beast once bore lamb-like horns, but now, in the 1850s, had become a dragon. By the 1880s, Smith and even the mercurial A.T. Jones assumed the basic outline of Ellen White's new eschatological scheme. If the Lord had delayed his coming was none the less sure. For the eyes that could see, a dark cloud gathered in an inchoate conspiracy that would one day smother the Republic. In the broadest terms, Ellen White diagnosed the American crisis as Strong did in our country, while her prognosis, unlike his, was fundamentally pessimistic. According to Mrs. White, the variegated elements of contemporary politics and society had polarized, as in any apocalypse, between temperate and intemperate, labor and management, country dweller and urbanite. Seventh-day Adventists were either caught in the middle of or forced to take sides on these issues, but finally they would be victimized by them. Catholic, Protestant, and occult spiritualist, which was virtually everyone in the Adventist purview, would form an improbable alliance over against the sectarian Adventist, as First-day Sabbatarian would oppose Seventh-day Sabbatarian in a spirit of religious intolerance. In the long counter-tradition of the suffering church, Mrs. White expected the abuse, primarily, of an Adventist minority rather than a slave minority to prove the undoing of American republicanism. The blue laws against Sabbatarian Adventists receiving renewed notoriety in the 1880s rather than the black laws against fugitive slaves of a generation earlier would color the ghastly events closing history. Eschatologically, the oppression of an American minority, that is, Seventh-day Adventists, remained crucial, but the particular minority proved transferable. Ellen White spoke of her people and her nation as she wrote, quote, "To secular popularity and patronage, legislators will yield to the demand for a Sunday law. Those who fear God cannot accept an institution that violates a precept of the Decalogue. On this battlefield comes the last great conflict of the controversy between truth and error, and we are not left in doubt as to the issue. Now, as in the days of Mordecai, the Lord will vindicate his truth and his people. By the decree enforcing the institution of the papacy, that is, first-day Sabbath, in violation of the law of God, that is, a national Sunday law, our nation will disconnect herself fully from righteousness. When Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, when she shall reach over the abyss to clasp hands with spiritualism, when, under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan, and that the end is near." End of quote. Liberty of conscience would die in America. Seventh-day Adventists would resort to civil disobedience in a last gasp of republicanism, but would be labeled defectors and anarchists. The labor unions, which loomed up darkly on the Adventist horizon as both Catholic and urban, would contribute to the diminution of human rights. The American beast, after all, entered the marketplace and caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he had that mark. We'll put in a link to a few videos we did on the book of Revelation, specifically on the treatment of it by Jehovah's Witnesses, and the first of those that is linked is called "How Finished is the Mystery," where we're looking at a book that Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to be proud of, yet almost none of them have ever read.